right, so let's get into the history. And this dude is called Anton Mesmer. Anton Mesmer. He is one person that I will bring up in this fascinating history. So history goes back thousands and thousands of years, right? They have it in Sanskrit writings in India, and they would use hypnosis in the healing temples and healing trances. Now, by the way, this is like a lot of information in terms of just listening to me talk, which you've been doing a lot this morning. Just notice I'll take you on a journey. So just enjoy the story. Just enjoy the story here, okay? So there is also evidence of hypnosis in ancient Egypt, in the Albers Papyrus and the sleeping temples, and they would do inductions of trance for healing. In Europe, you had the king or queen were said to have had the royal touch. So you could go and see the king or queen and get healed. It was thought that they could pass some sort of healing process. People were miraculously cured of numerous diseases. Interesting. Then in around 1500 AD, we've got Paracelsus invented the mercury cure, curing syphilis. Interestingly enough, what was not known about Paracelsus was that he experimented with magnets. He did healing with magnets. So he would take a magnet and he would pass it over a person's body like this, okay? And he did healing in this way. And he would believe it would stimulate the healing process. And people that came to him would believe that the magnet would stimulate the healing process. In 1600, there's evidence a fellow in Ireland by the name of Valentine Braithwaite, he would literally heal people by placing his hands on them and making magnetic passes over their body. He was known, by the way, as the Great Irish Stroker. In 1725, a Jesuit priest and astronomer, his name was Father Maximilian Hell, interesting name for a priest, was using magnets again to heal people. Father Max would have been unnotable if it wasn't for one of his young students, who was a medical doctor from Vienna named Franz Anton Mesmer, the dude on the screen here. And Franz Anton Mesmer, born in 1734 to 1815, Franz went to study with Father Max and got his own set of magnets. And he went back to Vienna to practice medicine. Now, in those days, one of the major interventions in medicine was bloodletting, which would mean they would make small cuts on someone, so someone's arm, if they had like a sickness or feeling unwell, they would bloodlet. So they would make a cut and the blood would come out and they would pass a magnet over the cut, over the blood, and it would stop bleeding. One day, Franz Anton Mesmer, he cut his patient as normal, and he went to pick up his magnets and he forgot his magnets. He actually picked up a stick and he thought, okay, I'm just going to pass this stick over the person, and he did. And it stopped bleeding. He went, it's not the stick. It wasn't the magnets. It's me. And forevermore, he would think that it was his magnetism of his hands that had this power over people to stop the blood, there. Now, what we would say today, if we were purely taking a hypnosis point of view on it, that the suggestion of passing the stick or the magnets over the bleeding was simply non-verbal suggestions that caused trance to occur, which caused the bleeding to stop. Now, Mesmer made a fatal error at that point and said that it's not the magnetic energy in the magnets that caused the bleeding, but it was his magnetic energy from him. And he then called it animal magnetism, because he's an animal, right? Now, the problem from that moment on was that scientists were now looking for this animal magnetism. And in those days, the ability to measure energy was not very precise. But Mesmer was on fire. He set up a very successful practice in Vienna. He moved to Paris and he became the darling of the French aristocracy. So it became that anyone that was anyone went and saw Mesmer for one of his magnetic cures. He was very successful, but he got too successful because the medical doctors then were paying attention to what he was actually doing. And the medical doctors didn't like it too. The medical doctors thought, wow, they're taking business from us. He hasn't studied, and he's making it all about him having this magic. And the doctors claimed he was a fraud. Mesmer then made his second fatal error, and he asked the French king for a board of inquiry to look into this even more. Now, the board of inquiry looked into whether animal magnetism existed or not. And we have a chemist called Lavoisier. Imagine being called that, Lavoisier. And Guillotine, by the way, as a medical doctor. Now, that's his last names, by the way, but still. And this medical doctor called Guillotine, he was an expert in pain control, and he invented a very successful headache cure. Now, Benjamin Franklin, we have all heard of, American diplomat who later went on to experiment with another form of invisible energy, electricity. Bless his heart, Ben said, "This fellow Mesmer is not flowing anything from his hands that I can see. Therefore, this mesmerism, that is actually where we get the word mesmerized from, this mesmerism must be a fraud." Mesmer was thus discredited. He left Paris discouraged and branded a quack, and he went back to Vienna to practice mesmerism or animal magnetism. But he never really recovered from the events back in 1785, and he died in poverty and obscurity. Now, remember I said it's interesting to see that even from the history, it can make sense as to why there can be so many misconceptions around hypnosis. It is in this history here. Now, from approximately around the time of the Board of Inquiry's findings in 1795 to approximately 1985, energy was left out of the equation for Western medicine and Western psychology. That's almost 200 years. Now, mesmerism disappeared into the background, but it was still practiced. Around the early 1800s, 1784, a retired French military man named the Marquis de Pussongueur noticed when applying mesmerism to a young shepherd that instead of the normal mesmerizing trance-like state, the shepherd actually fell into a deep sleep. In this state, the shepherd was able to open his eyes and talk slurred manner and act as if he was awake. On waking, the shepherd was unable to recall anything that had happened during the induction, and Pussongueur coined the term somnambulist, sleepwalker. Then we have in 1838. 1838, this history is incredible. John Elliotson, a professor of surgery at University College in London, and the inventor of the stethoscope, by the way, adopted mesmerism into his practice. He performed painless surgery and treatment of nervous disorders just from mesmerism. And the British Medical Journal condemned him as charlatan, and the council of the college forbade the application of mesmerism in the university hospital, whereupon Elliotson resigned his post. He resigned. Around 1840, young surgeon in London, James Braid, who was a Scottish physician, he went to see a mesmerist by the name of La Fontaine. Fontaine, a mesmerist in those days, would lie his patient down and stand at the head of the patient and make downward hand passes, right? So they're standing and they've got a table here and the patient's there lying on the table, and they would do this. And they noticed that the person lying down, the client, was fixated on watching the hypnotherapist's face or hands, but they were fixated on the person, again, looking up at the person's face or being fixated on the person's hands. Okay? Fixated, meaning like focus. Braid noticed that the patient's eyes were always fixed on the mesmerist, and he realized the importance of this for creating trance. And he coined the term that would describe this fixation, and he called it neurohypnosis, meaning nervous sleep, because hypnosis, by the way, derived from the Greek word hypnos, and hypnos in Greek means sleep. Now, he surmised that mesmerism did not involve the transfer of energy, and not due to the willpower of the mesmerist either, but it simply worked because suggestion caused the patient to go into trance. Suggestion did. Braid wrote the first book on hypnosis called Neuropnology, where he clarified that the fixation on a single point or idea causes hypnosis to occur. He clarified that the fixation on a single point. Now, he realized later that hypnosis wasn't the right term because hypnosis was not sleep, and he tried to change it to monoideism, like one idea. However, it didn't stick, and the term hypnosis was already in common use. Okay. Now, during this same period, 1950, another Scottish surgeon, James Esdale, wrote a book in India called Mesmerism after reading Elliottson's book, the dude who invented the stethoscope, right? And he performed surgery in a special hospital in Calcutta using mesmerism as an anesthetic to control pain. And this was all before the advent of the anesthetic chloroform. Now, Esdale performed over 500 operations, many being very painful ones, without anesthetic, including 19 amputations, and found that many patients healed in less time than the normal recovery time, but if they had nothing at all. He also noticed that the mortality, so he also noticed that the mortality rate dropped from 50% to just 5%. How cool is that? So mesmerism, from 500 operations, like 19 amputations, they would heal in less time, and many more would survive over having nothing at all. However, on his return to England, he too, like Elliotson, was drummed out of the British Medical Corps. He lost his license for suggesting that mesmerism could be used for pain control. Right, so he had this evidence, he had seen this work for his people, and yet the British Medical Corps had him lose his license for just suggesting that it was helpful. Now, interestingly, in one trial, one physician was said to have said that God intended people to suffer and that pain control should be born with Christian fortitude. Interesting. So they had this belief, right? But then the discovery of chloroform. Funnily enough, right on the heel of Esdale's return to England, chloroform was discovered, and the research into pain control stopped because of this drug. They now had drugs, right? Now, in 1864, Ambroise Lebault, a humble French physician, was working on a system of therapy using hypnosis in the city of Nancy in France. He read Braid's book, Neuropnology, he became known as the father of suggestive therapeutic hypnosis. Labolt, okay? The father of suggestive therapeutic hypnosis. To avoid being called a charlatan, he would not charge patients who agreed to be treated with hypnosis. He would give them a choice and he would say, you can have drugs, the chloroform, or you can have this surgery for free if you would like to control your pain with hypnosis. Interesting, hey? Around this time, a medical physician named Hippolyte Bernheim in Nancy, so again, Nancy in France, he was unsuccessful treating a patient's sciatica. And the patient in desperation went to Labolt and was quickly cured using hypnotic suggestion. So Bernheim originally wanted to expose Labolt as a quack, but ended up becoming fascinated by his methods and became an avid proponent of hypnotherapy and a devotee of Labolt. So thereafter, Labolt and Bernheim formed the famous Nancy School of Hypnosis and effectively revived the science of hypnosis. And this was one last ditch to revive mesmerism. So by the end of the 19th century, so we're still in the 1800s, Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot said to the greatest neurologist of the time, Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot, he was the greatest neurologist of the time, and he was impressed by a demonstration of a stage hypnosis show, and he began to experiment with hypnosis. He had never worked with hypnosis before, and only having worked with 3 hysterical women, he thought hypnosis was pathological and that hysterical could only be hypnotized. Only hysterical could only be hypnotized. He believed that the hypnotic state was produced by physical means and with the use of magnets and metals. So there was this 10-year controversy between the Nancy School of Thought, right? Bernheim and Labolt being very successful in hypnosis. And they were very much, again, about the power of suggestion, and Charcot. So that we have this conflict again over 10 years. So Charcot is like, oh no, it's this magnet, it's this magnet, and only hysterical people can be helped. And right, there was this conflict again. But after the death of Charcot in 1893, the animal magnetism hypothesis was refuted and the Nancy School of Thought prevailed. Right? So it's not animal magnetism, it's this power of suggestion. Now, guess who learnt from the Nancy School? Sigmund Freud. We've all heard of Freud, 1856 to 1939. Many physicians from many countries flocked to Nancy to study Labolt and Bernheim's methods, including Sigmund Freud. And the reason for mentioning Charcot was because Freud also studied with him too. Okay, so he was studying from these two schools of thought around hypnosis. Now, before developing psychoanalysis, Freud used hypnosis to explore the subconscious mind of the mentally ill and to better understand their personalities. From the study of hypnotism, he developed the theory of psychoanalysis. So even Sigmund Freud started with hypnosis. Okay. Now, Freud, he mistakenly thought that only a very deep stage of hypnosis was needed. He thought that was mandatory for therapeutic cure. And due to the disagreement between the 2 schools of thought at the time and Freud's own doubts, he abandoned hypnosis. Now, he decided to devote his time to the development of psychoanalysis, which was, by the way, like talking therapy. Now, publicly, Freud declared that he stopped using hypnosis because a young female patient jumped up and kissed him while being hypnotized. There is another explanation. Freud apparently used cocaine and he rotted out all his teeth. I looked this up, it was really interesting. And he got wooden teeth in replacement. Wooden teeth, wood. How strange, right? So Having wooden teeth made it hard to talk. It wouldn't really induce trance. If you can't talk properly, it wouldn't really have people relax, right? And yeah, so people would not be going into trance when he couldn't talk very well. And hence the development of his talking therapy, whereby the clients come in and do most of the talking. Yeah? Interesting, hey? Now, he was also too in competition with a very excellent hypnotherapist named Brewer, and Freud said his talking therapy would not be for the poor, and it would take 100 to 300 hours to effect a cure. This ended up changing the history of European psychology. Freudian psychoanalysis became the rage, and any other technique was inappropriate. Freud didn't discredit the validity of hypnosis, but due to his tremendous prestige, okay, so he never put hypnosis down in terms of, he never said it didn't work, but just because he was doing his talking therapy, and because of his tremendous prestige, his rejection of hypnosis, the fact that people were observing but he didn't use hypnosis, was a huge blow to its use. Like, a lot of followers took it to be sacred dogma, and then they didn't use hypnosis either. Right? Can you see? So because of this, hypnosis was pushed back into the hands of the quacks and the stage hypnotists for half a century. Now, first book on psychology in 1890, just before Freud rose to fame, William James wrote a book, The Principles of Psychology. And in the early 20th century, we have two schools of psychology formed. We have the analytical psychology with Freud, Adler, and Carl Jung. And we have behavioral psychology, who reacted against the Freudian psychoanalysis. Now, behaviorist psychology, who was like against the Freud, Adler, Carl Jung, this was people starting to get into, William Twittmeyer with the knee-jerk reflex. He was the one in 1902 who wrote a paper to the journal, to the American Medical Association, talking about the stimulus response. He was a medical doctor, and he was the one who would have the little hammer and hit people on the knee, and he would notice that people who'd come to him before, just by suggesting he was going to hit them with the hammer, the knee jerk would happen. And he was starting to form the idea of anchoring. Behavioral psychology, right? That we are all just acting from external responses. And no one really, but that wasn't really noticed, that concept, until Ivan Pavlov in 1904, so 2 years later, spoke about conditioned reflexes. And Pavlov, right? Pavlov and his dogs. So he spoke about the conditioned reflexes to the Russian Medical Society experiment with dogs. Okay, so we've got here now, in 1898, Boris Sidis at Harvard University wrote about the psychology of suggestibility. Okay, so again, now this is still going into behavioral psychology. This is the psychology of suggestibility. Because William Twittmeyer, was he also saying it was the suggestion that I was about to hit them on the knee that made the knee-jerk reflex happen. In 1903, Milne Bramwell, History of Hypnosis. It's a great reference book. Remember, you're going to get all this information from me, so you'll have all of this written down. And Milne Bramwell, writing this book, The History of Hypnosis, in 1903, he's listing all the hypnotic techniques before him. I haven't actually looked into that, but it says here he's like done a summary of all the hypnosis that's come before him. 1933, Clark Hull, and he wrote a book, Hypnosis and Suggestibility, one of the first psychological studies on hypnosis. One of Hull's most important observations was everything that assumes trance causes trance. Everything that assumes trance causes trance. Whatever that means to you. from this viewpoint of NLP, visualization is hypnosis. Being told to relax is hypnosis, is trance. Saying, I don't do hypnosis, I do meditation, or I do progressive relaxation, or I do creative visualization is trance, it's hypnosis. How noticeable, so this Clark Hull, noticeable for influencing a young Milton Erickson who practiced hypnosis between 1920 and 1980. We have our Milton Erickson here, 1920 and 1980. For 60 years, he was seeing up to 14 patients a day. Now, Milton Erickson's learnings were to change the face of hypnosis forever. We will be learning his techniques at this training. And truly, in different schools of thought, as I've picked up this book again, I'll talk about this book again with you later. But no matter who learnt with who with hypnosis, it always comes back to Milton Erickson. Perhaps the most important contributor to the acceptance of both the science and the art of hypnotherapy in the 20th century was a psychiatrist whom some call the father of counseling hypnotherapy, who also deserves the title grandfather of hypnotherapy, Dr. Milton Erickson. So great are this man's accomplishments that one could spend years just studying them. People with outstanding professional credentials have examined, analysed, and written books about the work of Dr. Erickson, and some of his past students have produced so much work here. So people have come after him, of course, and we're also going to look into their styles of hypnosis. You've got Dave Ellman. We'll go through some Dave Ellman processes. He helped the upswing in the medical community by the middle of the century by teaching hypnosis to many in the medical profession and the Council on Mental Health of the American Medical Association, which was finally accepted the use of hypnosis in 1958. So Dave Ellman again, he was on the Council on Mental Health of the American Medical Association, and it finally accepted the use of hypnosis in 1958. How cool is that? So 1943, George Estabrooks, he did a direct and authoritarian approach. We've got Andre Weisenhofer, General Techniques of Hypnotism. Leslie Lacron, in 1964, invented idiometer signals. Idiometer signals. And by the way, fixation causes trance. Fixation of focusing on something. So we don't have scripts, or by the way, hypnosis is not necessary to swing a pendulum in someone's face. But if you've ever seen this idea here, we could see that to be the fixation of one idea. And we've got Jeffrey Zeig, who is the head of the Erickson Foundation in Phoenix, along with Ernest Rossi, written many books on Ericksonian hypnosis. So the Ericksonian legacy is so alive. And by the way, to finalize the history of hypnosis, the courage to take action, to commit, even when you think and feel everything is lost. I think that could be one message of hypnosis history. And I have come to appreciate, again, how misunderstandings of the power of hypnosis can be, just by the interesting and fascinating. For hundreds of years, we have a lot of people to thank around these ideas.